Okay, let's start a module now on accounting ethics. And I want to start by just saying a couple of general things about accounting ethics. Accountants are, in the world of business, the referees. They are the people who keep everyone else honest. If you think about the job of the referee in a sports event, the job of the referee is to call it as neutrally as possible. Call it like he sees it. Okay, and I want to talk referencing the Stabas article on page 333, so I'm working a little bit ahead on the syllabus. But I want to talk about the ethics of that in the context of accounting. Okay, in the modern corporate accounting world, there is a way in which, and I'm going to be focusing on corporate audits first, okay, and we'll scroll through some different kinds of accounting and the ethics of the different kinds in a bit. But in the modern corporate accounting world, it's typical for the following relationship to obtain. So management hires audits for the sake of getting financing. Let's think this through for a minute. Let's take your average New York Stock Exchange Fortune 500 company. Management wants funding. That's why they've gone public in the first place. In order to get funding, they need to present to their potential creditors or equity providers evidence of a clean financial bill of health. That is, they need to show potential creditors that the creditors can trust the financials that the company is providing them with in their quarterly reports, their 10Ks, whatever they're doing in terms of their public filings. In order to obtain the financing from the investment bankers or even from the equity public, right, the equity providing public, like the retail investors who also provide financing increasingly these days. I'm going to editorialize for a minute. I'm really, really sick of Wall Street right now and the bull market right now. The longer a bull market goes on, the more you see frothy companies exploiting vulnerable retail investors using secondaries to finance their own expansion. And the recession, I hoped, would put an end to that, because generally these excesses are characteristic of late-term bull markets where companies hype the stock price, retail investors who are all vulnerable and believe in the hype flood in. Here's looking at you, Elon Musk. And the companies then basically pillage the investors, the retail investors, by issuing secondary after secondary, and they use the cash to fund their own stock options or to fund their own expansion. I'm really, really sick of that, and I thought the recession would end that, at least for a few years. But now I'm not so sure because the government rode in and bailed everybody out, so I'm not sure that that's actually going to happen. That's totally off-roading, Dr. Neal, totally editorializing. Management employs auditors to convince these sources of finance that they can invest with management. Okay, and that might be a term loan provider. Again, that might be somebody who's simply buying shares on the secondary market. To do so, they employ auditors. They open their books to the auditors. The auditors provide the public then with a sort of a stamp of approval, having looked at the books and having told the public, having consulted with management, having looked at the books, they can tell the public that the public can trust the financials that management is presenting them with. So these arrows represent information flow. Information flow comes from management to the auditors to the investing public. But that's not the entirety of the relationship here. There are two other arrows that I want to draw that cause great difficulties we might even call this the fundamental problem of corporate audits. Okay, the financiers provide management with money. So management is highly motivated to obtain financing. Okay, Elon Musk is highly motivated to obtain financing. He can't get it on good terms from the investment banks because Tesla is too great a credit risk. So he goes and he dupes a bunch of vulnerable retail investors into believing their hype stories about robo-taxis and missions to Mars and things like that. Okay, Neuralinks and pigs and stuff. And obtains secondary financing on the in the equity markets. But that's not the only financing arrow that exists in this relationship. There's another financing arrow. Management pays the auditors. Okay, because management wants to employ the auditors to inspect their books. Management wanting to employ the auditors to inspect their books needs to incentivize the auditors to be interested in the business and to do that, and so they have to pay the auditors. But here's the secret of all of finance, in terms of influence at least. Whoever pays the money calls the shots. And this is the fundamental problem. This arrow right here with the dollar sign right there strongly influences auditors to see things management's way. And it can't but do that because management pays the auditors. So the auditors are heavily, heavily influenced whether they like it or not. They can't wriggle out of that influence. They're heavily, heavily influenced to see things management's way. They can say, no, we won't see it the way you want us to see it, management. And management will say, take a hike. We're going to find an auditing firm that will see it the way we want it to be seen. So the auditors will lose their business. Because of that, because management pays the auditors, we have at the core of corporate audits an ethics problem. It's a conflict of interest problem. And the conflict of interest problem is that auditors have a heavily vested interest in siding with management and not with the financiers. Okay, you as an investor are not paying the auditors. So the auditors are not motivated to see things the way you would like them to see it. And the way you presumably as an investor want them to see it is as neutrally as possible, so that they're telling the truth as much as possible about the nature of the financial reports that the company is providing. But you don't pay them, so you can't actually make them see stuff that way. Now, lots of auditors are very honest, and I'm not saying all auditors are this way by any means, but enough are that it's a problem, and it's a perpetually recurring problem. Okay, some of us are athletes here. Imagine if HBU paid the referees directly. That's basically what's going on. Our referees, what are our referees, guys? Are they, what, Southland Conference, the umpire Southland Conference, so he's paid by the conference? Randy, you play ball, right, for football? You don't play any sport? No? Does anybody play any sport? Daniel's my only athlete here? Okay. But I think our football referees are Southland Conference people also. So you know that for sure, Daniel? Probably.
I know for sure umpires are baseball. I'm pretty sure it's the same for everybody.
So they're paid by the league office.
Correct.
School pays dues into the league office. League office pays the umpires. Okay. This is an arrangement that works well because the umpires are now not actually artificially motivated to side with a particular team in the way they call the game. But the problem here is basically the teams are paying the umpires directly. Now, there are some potential solutions here. We could nationalize the audits and have the government pay the umpires, like the league office pays the umpires. That's basically the solution there. So that the team's management are not directly paying the auditors. But that would have its own problems. The critics allege that if if that were to happen, then what would arise is a system where the corruption is not in the management auditor relationship, but rather in the government official auditor relationship. Because Lord knows government officials can be just as corrupt as management. Okay, so that's not necessarily going to solve it. Others have proposed that the public, the financiers, could pay the auditors. That's a potential solution. Maybe every time you trade shares in a particular company, you can pay an auditor fee, which helps pay the auditors. It goes into a common pool, helps pay them so that they see things a little bit less the way management wants them to see them, and a little bit more neutrally. But most people don't like that solution because that means that they have to pay a larger gatekeeper fee whenever they buy or sell stock. Do you guys see the problem here? Core problem in corporate audits? Does anybody have any solution? If you do, I'm open to it. Nick, you're my accountant. What do you think? He's thinking. Yeah, that's possible. The idea of using the government as a third party is the most popular one. Yeah, that is the most popular solution, other than what we've got right now. I guess I'd say, so this solution works well a lot of the time as long as these parties can stay separated from each other. We're going to be talking about Sarbanes-Oxley. And a major purpose of Sarbanes-Oxley as a law is to separate these two groups as much as possible from each other. To implement strictures that say things like auditors can't stay with a particular company for longer than a certain number of years. They can't have friends or relatives who have worked at the company or work currently at the company. They can't themselves have worked at the company. To try to separate these parties from each other. But as long as the money flows this way, the core problem will remain. Ethics does not consist in the formal rules that people abide by, but rather in the character of the people who are living under those rules. I have seen deeply unethical things happen when people were abiding by the rules, strictly speaking. So the fact of abiding by Sarbanes-Oxley does not necessarily mean that the management-auditor relationship is a moral one. Okay, but that is a pretty typical solution. Sarbanes-Oxley is a pretty typical solution these days. To maintain the financing relationship where management pays the auditors, but to try to institute government regulations where that relationship is made as non-chummy as possible. Okay, that's loosely based on Staubus. I will be getting into Staubus in much greater detail and the other articles on accounting ethics on Thursday, so you guys watch the videos for that. Are there any questions or comments on this?